The Once and Future Present, Episode 4, Different Lenses, Different Histories, an AP European History podcast brought to you by Hammer History Productions. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Once and Future Present. In today's episode, we're drawing from two of the books we've been using in class. The Houses of History, which introduces different schools of historical thought, and the Methods and Skills of History, which helps explain how historians work with evidence and build interpretations. I'm Casey, and in this episode, we're shifting gears a bit. Last time we talked about how historians use evidence and sources, and that left me wondering, if historians are working with the same material, why do they sometimes come to such different conclusions? That's what we're digging into today, the different schools of historical interpretation. Are some better than others? Why do they even exist? As always, I brought my teachers back to help sort this out, Professor Theo and Dr. Morgan. Okay, so in class, you've both mentioned things like Marxist history and empirical history, and I remember hearing about the analyst school, but I'm honestly confused. Are these just styles, or is one more correct than the others, Professor Theo?
That's a fair question. Think of these schools as different lenses. Each one emphasizes certain questions and ways of understanding the past. They aren't right or wrong, but they do shape how historians interpret the evidence.
Exactly. Historians don't just collect facts, they assemble narratives. And the way they frame those narratives, what they focus on, what they ask, depends on the lens they're using.
So let's start at the beginning. What's the original school, Dr. Morgan?
Actually, before we get to Ranke and modern empirical history, it's worth talking about how history was written before that. For a long time, history was more about storytelling, blending fact, legend, and moral lessons.
Take Herodotus, for example. He's often called the father of history. He lived in ancient Greece during the 5th century BCE and is known for writing the Histories, which describe the Greco-Persian Wars. But much of what he recorded came from oral traditions passed down for generations. His accounts often included fantastical creatures or miraculous events. It wasn't just about accuracy. It was about crafting stories with moral and cultural meaning.
And then there are medieval texts like the Song of Roland. That epic poem dramatically inflates the number of Saracen troops Charlemagne's knights were said to have faced, turning what was probably a much smaller skirmish into a grand battle to glorify Christian kingship and knightly valor. That brings us to Leopold von Ranke, a 19th century German historian who's often credited with founding the modern discipline of history. He believed that historians should base their work entirely on primary sources and aim to describe the past as it actually happened.
Ranke was reacting against earlier, more literary or moralizing styles of history. He emphasized archival research, footnotes, and source criticism. Basically, he wanted history to be more like a science, objective, disciplined, and rooted in documents. You could say Ranke started the idea empirical history.
Okay, but isn't that kind of what we already do in school?
To a degree, yes. But as time went on, historians began to question whether facts alone were enough. Enter Marxist history.
That brings us to Karl Marx, a 19th century philosopher, economist, and social theorist who lived in Germany and later in England. He's best known for writing the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. And his ideas laid the foundation for Marxist approaches to history, whose ideas inspired Marxist history. Marxist historians believe that the driving force of history is economic structure. Who owns what, who works, and how that creates conflict. They focus on class struggle, production, labor systems, and how material conditions shape people's lives.
So instead of focusing on kings and treaties, Marxist historians look at peasants, workers, and systems of inequality. They might study how the Industrial Revolution created new social classes, or how colonialism exploited labor for profit.
So it's like, instead of great men, it's the economy as the driving force of change?
Pretty much. But again, it's a lens, not the whole picture.
Okay, what about the Annalise School? That name sounds fancy.
It's French, and it is fancy in a way. The Annalist School began in the early 20th century. Historians like Marc Bloch, a French medievalist and resistance fighter during World War II, and Fernand Braudel, a 20th century French historian known for his work on the Mediterranean world, both helped establish the Annalist School in the 20th century, wanted to move away from just political events and look at long-term social structures, what they called the longue durée.
Instead of focusing on wars or revolutions, they looked at geography, climate, family life, even diet. They believed that real change happens over centuries, not decades.
So they kind of zoomed out?
Exactly. And they drew from other fields, sociology, anthropology, economics. Their work is often interdisciplinary.
So we've got rank with documents and elites, Marxists with economics and class, and the Annalise School looking at deep structures. What's next?
Well, after World War II, and especially by the 1960s and 70s, new voices began pushing for more inclusive histories, including feminist, post-colonial, and cultural history.
Feminist historians like Joan Kelly, who famously asked, "Did women have a renaissance?" challenged traditional narratives and asked why women were missing from historical accounts and began reconstructing their lives through alternative sources, like court records, letters, even folk songs.
Post-colonial historians, such as Edward Said, a Palestinian-American scholar who wrote Orientalism and critiqued Western representations of the East, and Dipesh Chakrabarti, an Indian historian known for provincializing Europe and applying post-colonial theory to global history, look at how imperialism affected both colonizers and colonized. And they're especially attentive to the legacy of racism and the voices that were silenced or distorted in colonial archives.
So they're asking, whose story got told and whose didn't?
Exactly. And finally, by the late 20th century, we also see the rise of postmodern and narrative approaches. These historians, including thinkers like Hayden White, argue that history is always a construction, that even when we try to be objective, we're still telling stories.
They're interested in how language, structure, and perspective shape what counts as truth. Some even question whether we can ever really know the past as it was.
Wait, that feels a little unsettling. Like, if everything is interpretation, does that mean nothing is true?
It's not that there's no truth. It's that there are always filters. The historian's background, their questions, their sources. A good historian is aware of those filters and tries to be transparent about them.
And that's why we teach the 5 C's, to help you develop habits of thinking that can handle complexity without falling into total relativism.
Okay, so is one of these schools better? Like, should I be a Marxist historian or an analyst historian?
There's no one-size-fits-all. Most historians draw from multiple schools depending on the question they're asking. Some questions need economic analysis, others need cultural or political framing.
Think of the schools as a toolbox, not a set of rival teams. You don't need to pick one. You learn what each can do, and then you apply the right tools to the problem you're studying.
That actually helps a lot. I kept thinking I had to choose one right answer, but it's more about knowing the options.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful, intentional, and flexible.
Thanks so much. I feel like I finally get why historians argue so much. It's not that they're disagreeing on facts, it's that they're using different lenses.
Well said.
Next time on The Once and Future Present, we're diving into the 14th century, the Black Death, social unrest, and why it's sometimes called a crisis of the late Middle Ages. Was it the end of an age or the start of something new? Until then, check out our AP Euro music projects by searching Hammer History Productions on YouTube or Spotify. And as always, stay curious and think critically.